Hundreds of workers, executives and business owners from the poultry industry marched to the EU embassy demanding a stop to chicken dumping.
Dumping is not fair competition. We marched today with a single, simple demand to EU countries. Stop chicken dumping. Stop it immediately.
We are here to march against that because we are not want to be unemployed in our company because of some import that come into our country.
I'm marching because of my job. I have got 2 children and then I'm studying at unis. So I'm working at Festive to keep on for my studies. So if my job finish, no more studying, I'm going to suffer and my children also are going to starve.
The industry says the government is to blame as it's allowing other countries to dump their chicken products in South Africa. 1,350 people in the South African poultry industry lost their jobs last month, bringing the total number of job cuts in the last year to 5,000.
Imports are now 10 times what they were 7 years ago. And you know, when you have a situation where there's hopeless oversupply worldwide, where prices are arriving, the product is arriving here, dumped to leg quarters at such a low price, way below the cost of production, you simply cannot compete with dumping, which is why it's illegal.
Marchers handed over a memorandum to the EU representative in Pretoria demanding they stop the dumping.
We are fully committed to dialogue and we are fully committed to developing this industry. We just find ourselves on a different end of the trade pattern, but there is no willingness to create havoc in this market.
The problem of dumping is not new in South Africa. A few years ago, the government filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization against Brazil. Last year, South Africa gave in to US demands allowing for chicken imports in order to save AGOA.
We gave notice to all the contract growers in our Mafeking region in the northwest. We've been hanging in there and haven't closed that abattoir. If we do 965 direct jobs and if you add all the indirect jobs, it'll get to about 1,600.
The poultry industry has been raising its concerns on this issue for years now. This was amplified last year during the AGOA renewal negotiations. The government has now set up a task team to look into how it can avoid further job losses. Sumitra Nydoo, CGTN, South Africa.
Well, let's get some more insight into this. Sumitra Nydoo now joins us in Johannesburg. We're also joined by Jack Aparak in Brussels. Sumitra, let me start with you. Now, just last week, we saw Trade Minister Rob Davies confirming what protesters are saying there. He basically said that competitiveness in the sector was threatened by imports flooding South Africa's market. The EU, on the other hand, says it's just a scapegoat. Now, realistically, who really is to blame, Sumitra?
Well, Uche, some will blame it squarely on globalization. South Africa is trading with the rest of the world, and we heard recently at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the World Trade Organization chief saying that not everyone wins in trade deals, and it looks like South Africa in this case is the loser. Chicken imports have been flooding the local market for years. The government has taken up the issue. Previously did lay a complaint with the WTO against Brazil over dumping. 5 years ago, though, tariffs were scrapped under a trade agreement between the EU and South Africa. Since then, chicken imports from the EU has more than tripled. Now, in December, the International Trade Commission put in place a safeguard duty of 13.9% and said the allegations of illegal dumping against the EU would be investigated. That could only be concluded around June, July this year. And of course, last year, South Africa succumbed to pressure from the US to allow for chicken imports, even though they didn't meet health standards. Now, some are blaming government for the way it's negotiating this trade deal. So, you know, it's quite complex on how this is moving.
Well, Jack, let's get your insights. We know the EU is strongly contesting these arguments put forward. It basically says the sector's problems are either structural or even self-inflicted. But now that they are gaining some political traction in South Africa, is it willing to have a discussion with South Africa's government?
Yes, indeed. The European Union insisted that it would welcome the demonstrators and would speak to them about their concerns. But from an EU perspective, they say that realistically only 7% of the South African consumption of these poultry products comes from the European Union. And it argues that that essentially wouldn't be enough to constitute a flooding of the market. The EU says that drought it has been to cause for the rising prices in feed for poultry in South Africa, and also the rising prices of electricity in order to conduct the farming, and that's why there's been a problem in the South African poultry market. But indeed it does say that it's willing to continue discussions to avoid any and try and appease some of the concerns of these South African farmers.
Now, Sumitra, it's getting quite political there in South Africa. We've seen the ANC suggesting the government buy poultry farms that are closing down. Also, the EFF is calling for the imposition of a 50% tariff on all chicken imports. Now, could we see the government intervening soon?
Well, Uche, we have seen discussions are already underway. Of course, you know, unemployment is a huge concern for South Africa, now at 27%. And with the warnings coming from the poultry industry, another 20,000 jobs could be lost in the coming months, in the coming years. So a poultry sector task team has been set up by government. It comprises various ministries, including economic development and agriculture. The unions are involved, their industry bodies as well. Also the Industrial Development Corporation, all meant to pull together to deal with this crisis and see how they can actually lift this industry and avoid any further job losses. The team is looking at trade measures, health and quality issues, competitiveness, industry growth and transformation, as well as financing and looking at financing incentives for this industry. It's been a big contentious issue. And you know, as we heard Jack talking about the drought as well, you know, maize has been a big contributor here as well. This has been very costly. Agricultural farming overall has been in a lot of trouble over the years. So this is a very important issue that will also come up for discussion. It will also explore demand-side interventions.
Now, Jack, like you mentioned, the EU says it is ready to discuss the remedies, but it certainly had some tough words for protesters and, of course, the sector as a whole. Now, how do you see this affecting relations between the EU and South Africa's government going forward?
Well, the European Union is going to be keen to try and be seen as an open and free trading partner, clearly in the global spectrum of this, with Donald Trump in America looking to look more internally as far as trade deals go. We've seen pretty much the end of an EU-US trade deal. And we also, interestingly, saw the South African Trade Minister, Rob Davis, say that he would be prepared to make a deal with the United Kingdom once the UK leaves the European Union pretty quickly. The European Union is keen to try and position itself as a fair and clear and open trading partner. So this issue, while the European Union says it's not its fault and the poultry issue in South Africa is not to do with European products entering the South African market, it's going to be keen to get on the right side of this one to ensure that its relationships with trading partners with big foreign third parties from an EU perspective like South Africa aren't hampered. You'll remember that only last year the European Union signed what's known as an economic partnership agreement with the Southern African Development Community, and that was heralded as a pretty successful deal. And this obviously now is the first major kind of dispute that we've seen between the two sides since then. So from an EU perspective, they'll try and want to get this one to go away pretty quickly.
Well, many thanks to both of you for those insights. Of course, Sumitra Nydoo joining us in Johannesburg and Jack Parrock in Brussels.